Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lefarius and this is episode number 18. And for this week in a little while we're going to be covering Krusty's Super Funhouse. But as always, before we jump into that, let's just have a look at some of the week's news. Now, first up, I had a brand new Patreon supporter. He's actually told me how to pronounce his name, which is a huge help, thank you. He's a chap called Graham W. Vebke. I actually got that one right for a change. We're getting quite a few Patreon supporters now. A big thank you to all those involved. One thing I do offer on there is a list of show notes for those supporting at the $4 level. I think I keep quite extensive notes every week, so I'm hoping they're interested. Nobody's been complaining, so we will keep on doing them. Now, one thing I've been trying to do this week especially is coming up with a couple of new episodes to cover, and I wanted to do one about Final Fight and Chase HQ 2, and I was looking into them, doing my usual stuff and looking into the history and trying to find out reviews, interviews and stuff like that, and then I suddenly realised, I better try them first, and I loaded them up on my Amiga emulator, because the only way I can cover them easily is if it works on my emulator on my PC, so I can capture footage, and then I'll try it on the actual Amiga itself just to see what it's like on actual hardware. But with these two titles, I've had all sorts of problems, and I tried a couple of ADFs with them, but they just would not load properly. They get about as far as the title screen and then crash out straight out afterwards. I didn't have problems on the actual Amiga hardware, but if I can't capture footage from them direct, then it's a bit of a problem. So if anybody's any suggestions for that, just drop me a line at Lefarius at AMIGArama.com. I really am stumped and I'd like to go back to them games. One thing I did that just catch my eye on Twitter the other night is Dan from the Retro Hour podcast. He's managed to get his hands on a CD32 version of Hired Guns. Now, this was never released, but it was just stashed on, I believe, one of the developers' hard drive somewhere, and he's handed it over after one of the interviews they did, and he's managed to get it running, and he was showing it off on Twitter a few days ago, and then he went silent after, so I'm not entirely sure where that's up to on that game, but I'm actually quite looking forward to it because it looks really, really good, and it's a fairly good A1200 game because I've been dabbling in it recently because of all the excitement. Now, one thing I am going to next week on the 3rd of March, I'm off to something called the Video Game Market, just up the road in Doncaster from me. I say up the road, it's almost an hour's drive away. But I'm actually going there to have a stall. I have a large selection of these, they're called like vinyl Funko Pop figures. I've never really tried this before. I've also got a science fiction convention lined up, so it's something a bit new to try out, and I'm taking a few of them with me, and I thought I'd take some like 360 games with me as well, because I've had them building up for a while. So if you're walking around the video game market and you see someone looking a bit inconspicuous, it's probably me with the Funko Pop figures. Yeah, I don't know what they've got to do with gaming things, but I'll give it a go. It's not too far away. Now for some news, one thing I noticed pop up on Indie Retro News the other day, someone's created, basically it's called Better Workbench 43. Now, from what I can gather from the description of this, they've basically gone back to, 4.3. They've gone back to Workbench, they've stripped out so all the rubbish, everything that might load on the uptake when you first boot it up, stuff that takes things out of RAM and then slows down WHD load gains and everything. And what they've actually left with is a very, very stripped down version of Workbench, so you can run things off the hard drive, some very basic programs and things like that. And it seems to be a very, very, if you're just only interested in this for the games, it's basically like an updated extension to Amiga OS 3.1. Anyway, if you only want to play the games, this is perfect because there's no extra tools, there's nothing fancy about it, but it'll run everything like 100% as you need it to, so it's well worth a download. As I say, it's on version 4.3, and I'll stick the link in the show notes. With that out of the way, let's move on to this week's game. Now, for this week, I've gone and picked Krusty's Super Fun House. Now, this wasn't something I'm really experienced with on with the Amiga back in the day, but I did play it quite a fair bit on the Super Nintendo. There was a video shop near me at the time that rented out cartridges, which was quite a bonus, really. I mean, especially when they were like £40-50 at a time. You know, as a kid, you just couldn't afford that. And this was one of those that always drew me by the fancy looking graphics, and I can remember the cover very, very clearly. It's always stood out in my mind. It was a great cover, but then again, was it a great game? That's what the episode's about. The publisher for this, seems to be a mixed thing between Acclaim and Virgin. I think Acclaim were behind developing it, and then Virgin just pushed it out through the doors. Now, usually I go to a site called Hall of Light, which is the main database for Amiga game, because it gathers loads of stuff there, like things like when a game came out and more in-depth information, and it's just, it's a very, very handy resource. Just search HOL on Google, it'll give you the link. But the developer, this one, they had nothing listed there, which just stood out as very strange for me. So I even went back and started reading through various magazines to, try and get some like preview information, see if there are any interviews, the actual reviews themselves for the games, but there was just nothing about it, so I'm not entirely sure who developed it as a company. Maybe it was just Acclaim and Virgin themselves, I'm not sure, but I did find out who the coders were, but again, that doesn't necessarily tell you the company they work for. Now, it was only on one disc. Now, I mean, that's the funny thing if you think about it. I mean, it just shows the size of a SNES cartridge, because some of the Amiga games which were converted the other way they'd be absolutely huge. They could be on loads and loads of discs, so it just shows you how much space is on one of them cartridges. But then again, it's only got one disc for this as a game, which isn't very good. Price wise, it was $25.99 when it came out. Now, I'm starting to get used to that being like the main release price for games at the time. I always vaguely remember them being a lot cheaper than that, but maybe I was just on the few Amiga games that I was a bit of a pirate, I'm afraid. But on the few Amiga games I did buy, they always seem to be like £10 to £15. So I don't know how quickly prices dropped on these back in the day. Now, it was coded by a chap called Scott Williams, who did Bubble and Squeak as one game. I was going to say that was the Mega Drive game, but I'm thinking of Bubba and Sticks. I'm not sure what Bubble and Squeak is. Sounds like, something to do with cheese. Another game called Pinky. I don't know what that is. That sounds very odd. And another title called Rat Trap, which we'll get onto in a bit, but that was basically the original idea for what later became Krusty's Super Funhouse. Now, the music was done by a very famous Amiga game music guy, David Whittaker. I think we mentioned him on the podcast before, but he did games like Epic, which was the ocean game. I think it was a space fighting game. Golden Axe, Bubble Bobble. I mean, just looking at the list of titles he was involved, I mean, I couldn't even go through it. It'd take me like an hour just to read them out, but he had prolific like involvement with all these titles across God knows how many games. So he was very, very handily involved. But when we get to the music in a bit, it's a bit lazy for this game, but anyway. It turned out that it was a multi-platform release, so it came out the NES, the SNES. I know some people have called it, because I call it SNES, but SNES if you're over in the US, or NES. Anyway, what can I say? I'm just bizarre. Mega Drive, Master System, a Game Gear version, Game Boy version, and a PC port as well. I suspect that's probably DOS, because mid-90s because it was a 93 game. Now, originally, like I say, it was designed as Rat Trap, and from what I could find out in an interview, it was later changed to add Simpsons characters in. Now, I think this was quite a common thing to happen with licensed titles, because they'll produce a game first, and usually they just go and release it, but then they go and think, oh well, we might be able to go and get something like a Simpsons license, or a Flintstones license, or even something like the A-Team. I'm just thinking of games like on the original Atari 2600, these big TV licenses which can be converted from something else very easily. Now, weirdly, and I don't know why, but versions of the game had super imposed into the title, or maybe the super came later. But in some places it's just called Krusty's Funhouse, but on other systems it's Krusty's Super Funhouse, like it is on the Amiga. Now all I can think is maybe on the Super Nintendo they didn't want to put in Super Nintendo Krusty's Super Funhouse because it might be just a bit overuse of the name. But very, very strange thing to discover. I mean, as a game, one thing the title for this always reminds me of is something called Pat Sharp's Funhouse, which used to be on. God, this is really scraping my memory. I think it was on ITV. It must have been the late 80s, maybe the early 90s. God, what a show that was. That was basically a huge fun house with kids running around in a competition trying to win prizes with this guy with the world's worst mullet hair. Oh, God. The 80s and 90s were a very, very funny time. Now, with it being a puzzle platformer, I don't really know how else to describe this. The story is pretty simplistic and it's your usual licensed stuff, but I'll just read out what I've got from the manual. AMIGArama! Bart's superhero, Krusty the Clown, is in really bad trouble. Rats have invaded his funhouse. Is it Sayonara, Krusty Land? No way, man. Bart and Homer stand armed with the coolest rat traps ever. Ever see a rat zapped with 20,000 volts or burst like a balloon? Warning kids, do not try this at home. We don't advocate cruelty to real animals, only their cartoon equivalents. I don't think that's still right. All Krusty has to do is get the rats to traps by moving blocks, connecting pipes, finding secret passageways, wrecking the floors and walls, and generally having a great time. As for the slimy snakes slithering on the floors, the pink flying pigs bouncing around the sky, and the laser-firing aliens, Krusty will show them some real fun with a barrage of custard pies. So, before sawtooth rodents ruin Bart's #1 funhouse, and frankly outlandish creatures nail the man who put the K in comedy, that's spelt with a K, play this game. Krusty the Clown needs you. Yes, you little... ... That's, yeah, I mean, it pretty much describes the entire game, right? And it literally does. I mean, it might as well just be a review for the entire game. Now, the game itself, it's got 60 levels, which is a hell of a lot of content for a one-disc title. And the entire point of it is basically to get a group of rats that are wandering out of a door over to a machine with Bart, where he squashes them with a huge glove, a boxing glove. Very, very strange. Or the other one is you get them to Homer and he blows them up, blows them into balloons and then they pop. I mean, I suppose it matches with the humour. There's not very many Simpsons characters in it, but the ones that are in, of course, Krusty himself is very recognisable, as is Bart and Homer. There's not lots of Simpsons references. You can clearly, right from the off, tell that it's another game that's been designed around this license. Like in the background you've got adverts for Moe's and famous phrases from the shows and things, and there's not like lots of drawn artwork and stuff, but the great thing about it is that it's very, very colourful. Even all the versions I've seen of it does actually look pretty good, and the way the characters are defined on screen and stuff, again, especially Krusty and the way he moves, it's animated as well as you would think it would be. I mean, the humour behind the entire game, it's a bit like Lemmings in a way. The entire point of it is supposed to be wiping out the rats. But the thing is, you can't kill the rats in any other way. They've not got weapons or any sort of fancy tools to use with them. Now, the entire game is based around puzzles. They do actually get quite tough as you go along with the levels. It's your typical game for this time. But one thing I did find as I was playing it through for the episode, the first few levels are really, really easy. And this is the early days of video games, really. And especially for that drive towards easing a player into them. And it does this quite well, I found. It shows you how the controls work. It's not too panic or mad. There's no timer or anything. You can go through it. There's no mad rush rather to get through the levels. But I think it's probably the first 3 or 4 are fairly easy, and then it ramps up a bit straight after that. And again, it does that quite well. I played on a straight run probably about 9 levels straight away, and it took me probably about 45-50 minutes to get through. So yeah, I had quite a good time with it on that part. The point of each level is basically, you squish the rats, and then when you've done that, you then have to get to the exit. But the great thing is, it doesn't just finish the level there straight away, but the thing is that opens up the game to really explore levels, to see what's hidden, get more points. There's loads of hidden items and things. There is different, there's very few actually. There's things like you're armed with, I think it's 10 pies when you start off. Now, the funny thing I thought with the pies is they don't really look like pies. They look more like little balls which are cake coloured, but it's very, very odd. And they go in a strange arc right in front of you, but they are limited. But luckily you can pick up a fair few of them dotted around. There's also things like weapons with like the bouncing ball. Basically, you hit that and it will destroy any walls it finds in a way, but only certain block walls. They've got to be like a dark brown. It's a very, very odd choice, actually. The controls for this are really, really simplistic. Again, that's probably a good thing for the type of game it is. It's up for jump. Press fire just throws a pie. If you run up to an item that you can kick, like another block, just run up to it, press fire, it'll do the kick. It will not throw a pie. You have to be pushing against it. Or you can press down to collect the blocks. And the way the blocks work is if you get to, let's say, so you've got the rats running along in a straight line, and there's a block in front of them or a wall which is too high. So then you just run up to the wall straight in front of you, drop the block there, and then the rats just automatically climb up and over and then keep on going. And that's the entire point of every level. And there's a few puzzly bits along the way. That's pretty much the entire game. There's not much more to it than that. One of the funny things I did find about it is as I was going from level to level, they actually use the Simpsons name for passwords, which in a way is a bit spoilerish because if you know the characters, you can pretty much jump to several of the different levels. They've actually said there's 60 levels, but they're split over. There's 5 passwords throughout. One of the other funny things I did know is Krusty can jump, and I mean he can really, really jump. He'd give like Mario a run for his money. When he takes off, he really does have some good distance, and I quite like the jumping controls with it, really. It's quite well done. It's not too fast, it's not too slow, it's just that right. There's enough gravity with it that you get enough momentum through the air and you can bounce up and over things and avoid the enemies on the way. One thing you won't be doing in the levels is because you've got like such limited ammo, it's handy to take out the odd thing like the snake enemies and things that just run around on the bottom of levels, and sometimes they can get in the way when you're trying to work your way through all the different items and objects and things. There's not very many things that get in the way as objects that you can't bounce over or jump around. That's probably a bit disappointing for the game, actually. I say the weapons are a bit limited. There's only things like the bouncing ball and the pies, but I mean that's probably one of the. We'll get to that in a bit anyway. With the music being done by Dave Whittaker, you'd expect like something really special for this, but it's pretty much most of the music is just on loop, and it's not the greatest. But one thing I did take from it, especially in the first few levels, it's very clown-like. It sounds, I don't know, that fairground sort of sound to it. It's so I suppose it matches the game. It's good enough, but again, it sounded a bit lazy to me. I could have done so much more, and it's odd that there's no like Simpsons type theme mixed in. But again, that was a very common thing with big licenses back in the day. They always seem to want to. They'll pay for the license for the actual object, but not any of the things like the themes or the music that ties into them. Like the classic Simpsons theme. If it's a Simpsons game, it should be involved. There's also a very, very odd thing with the sound, but there's not that very many sound effects. It's just constantly with the music. it could have maybe done with something like a jump sound. I mean, when you jump, it's completely silent. I mean, the control on that part is fine. You know, it works well, but there's no sort of like, it's not like say with Mario boing, boing going on as you're running along. There's just nothing there. So that can be sort of distracting. It can put you off in a way. And another problem I did, which did surprise me, I tried it on several different Amigas. So I tried the A500, the A600 and the A1200 because I was hoping that there would be a difference, but the scrolling it's very, very off. It's quite jerky. And what I mean is, when you jump, I mean, the Krusty moves fine, but the whole level sort of like, it's as if it's scrolling up like slightly off every so often. It doesn't happen constantly. It only seems to jerk in places. It's almost like it's slowing down, but it's not, because that doesn't actually affect the game. It's very, unless you actually seen it live, it's very, very strange, but it can be off-putting. I mean, after a while playing, you just get used to it and the way the game interacts and stuff. Another odd choice as well. I mean, they obviously had a Simpsons license here, and one of the things I can't understand is why did they pick Krusty as the main character for this game? I mean, even in the show, he's not exactly a fun character. He's an awful guy, and that's the part of his character. He's this awful guy. He's an alcoholic. He gambles and all the rest of it, and it just seems he isn't funny and entertaining, and you would not see Krusty the Clown getting involved with something like Bart's Funhouse. He would have no interest in it whatsoever. He'd just be rather off gambling somewhere. So very odd thing. It's just like, again, it's just they've slapped this character on. They need something to match it, and it's like, well, he's cute and fun. He's a clown. Everybody loves clowns, and I don't think it actually works. And the other side of it is, I suppose, you've got Bart Simpson in the game and Homer. It would have been better if you'd have just had them as characters, and maybe Krusty was off to the side on the machine doing the bouncing around and the jumping and stuff, but it doesn't actually work. I mean, there's loads of Simpsons characters they could have gone with or made more appearances, but there's just nothing in it. It's a very, very lazy license port in that sense. They could have done so much with the characters. I mean, there's lots of other Simpsons games. I think Acclaim did loads. I think they did Bart versus the Space Mutants. That's not a great game, but the fact is that had a lot of the Simpsons characters in, so there was a big library, and they just picked none. A big problem I did have it as well. There's no map. I mean, some of these levels are absolutely huge, and I went right through towards the end. And I mean, the proper like mind benders with puzzles and stuff and there's just, you have to remember it all. There's lots of places where you've got things like, you try to line up with the rats and things and time things and dropping blocks in right places. You've got to be really, really quick. But the level's massive. It needs to have like a map. Just even if you'd have pressed, I don't know, a button on the keyboard or something to flip up a menu would have done. Maybe just to give an overview of where things are, and it just doesn't work. But then at the same time, it does give you the opportunity to explore everything, because you really need to know these levels in and out. You need to look in every nook and cranny to try and get all the bonuses. And I think it's a big thing about points as well in this game. But I mean, I suppose that's a funny thing, because back in the day, I don't know why points was such a big driving thing. They always seemed off to me again, because I was never really interested in getting a high score, unless you were focusing on like an arcadey style game. And another issue I did have it as well is again, because I was trying to get this, I did this over a couple of nights trying to get as much coverage for the podcast and just to play it through for the review, but the passwords on it, it's not very good for a save system, because they're a good old chunk apart. I mean, you've got to do I think it's 10 or so levels before you get the first password. But the thing is, I mean, that can take you about 45, 50 minutes. Even if you know what you're doing, that's probably still half an hour of play before you get to a point where you're effectively saving. It's a bit frustrating, but then at the same time, it's a password in it. So once you know the password, you can always go back to that point. But then if you want to get to the next password and and you're playing it through the first, it's really, really a massive distance. They should have just split the passwords up more. Maybe add more points dotted through where you could maybe talk to one of the, there you go, parents for a Simpsons character. Have someone in a little booth or someone which would just pop up and just say, oh yeah, the password is blah, 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 blah. And you continue from then on. The magazines at the time were quite impressed with this, I think. Amiga Format gave it 85%, The One 84%, Amiga Action 82%, Amiga Power 74%, that's probably the lowest I could find, Amiga Computing at 80%, so, it's an 8 out of 10 sort of a game, lowest Amiga Power. They are always, seem to be quite hard on games, I think they tend to be the more truthful ones. In truth, it's a good looking game. It's fun to play. I quite enjoyed it. It does have that problem with the password system being dotted. You can just cheat these days and look them up on the internet, I suppose, but it's not really suited for short bursts in that sense because it takes a while to get through level, but at the same time it can be quite repetitive, so you don't want to be playing this for like umpteen hours going on, because the problem is it doesn't really change as the game's going on with the puzzles. Everything's very, very similar, even though the looks of the levels and things change around the character and there's different bits of background and art and stuff, but the actual core of the game, the puzzle, it's like having 2 or 3 tools on, say, Lemmings, and then not being able to use anything else for the rest of the game. And that was one of the biggest problems. When I went to the very later levels and they were just getting bigger and bigger, and part of me was just getting a bit bored by that point because I think, not much is changing. It's okay. It's okay. It's not a bad game by any means. The controls work well. I had a fair bit of fun as I was going along, but I think that now I've got that far in it, and I didn't complete it. I got close towards the end, but I just got bored. That's terrible, isn't it? I could have probably completed it as well. One of the good things about it, for sure, is that the later levels can be like absolutely mind-bending, tough. You've really got to get everything lined up perfectly. And one of the problems I did have with it is there is some... It's not awful collision detection, but it's not as good as it should be. You can get hit by enemies and things at fairly... a bit of a distance away, actually. And one thing that I did thought was funny, that it's like if you walked, it's like in like the Sonic or a lot of platforming games from this era, they'd start doing movements, and if they're hanging over the edges, if they're going to fall, that sort of thing. But the thing is with Krusty, you can practically walk him right off the edge, and the entire character is just stood there, like over thin air practically, maybe like 1%, and he's still on the platform. It needed maybe a bit more tidying up or tucking away. I will give you the password for level 5 is Maggie, and that's in big capital levels. And if you want to see the difficulty, if you're going back to it, by all means, just go and have a gander at that and just see if you can wrap your brain around it, because it's quite a tough one. Now, out of all the Simpsons games from back in the day, I think this is probably one of the better ones, and that really isn't saying much, because there really was some truly terrible ones. Most of the acclaimed ones were absolutely rubbish. I think Virtual Simpsons, I think it was called, was probably my favourite, but I think that was on PC back in the day. Was it Virtual Simpsons or Virtual Springfield? I'm not sure. Anyway, the entire point of that being as a game was you would walk around Springfield and get to see different parts of it and lots of voice. That's the way to use a license based on The Simpsons, because you have a bit of humour, a bit of comedy in there. Again, something Amiga could have probably run something like that. It did have a CD drive, and the CD30. And again, the CD32 only lasted about 5 minutes, didn't it? So it wouldn't have had the chance. What a shame. It's certainly not a bad game. I had fairly good fun with it. I can understand the scores of around about 80%. It's good enough for what it is. Price-wise, there's probably several hours worth of gameplay, which at the time is okay for something like that. And there's a re-release that came out much later as well. Back in the day, I'd have probably played a pirate version. What can I say? But one thing I did gather from the entire experience, that it felt like it was missing something, and I'm not entirely sure what it was, but it was very repetitive on part. I mean, if you keep returning it over a few days, it was all right, but I could see you get annoyed with it quite quickly if you're playing it for a full weekend. You need to take your time with it to enjoy it properly, because it's not the sort of game you should be playing in large chunks of times. But it just needed a bit more tweaking, I think. Maybe if they'd changed the puzzles and had the rats more interactive, maybe more weapons or a way to get Krusty to interact with the environment more, to not just destroy like blocks and things, but to have some more inventive puzzles within the level. I mean, steal a few ideas from Lemmings. I mean, everybody did, because it was a fantastic game and there was a very good reason for that, you know. They could have done so much more, but again, at the same time, it's just it's a licensed game, so they're not going to go overboard, and this is what we ended up with. So yeah, that does sound a bit depressing, doesn't it? Again, it's enjoyable. It's probably worth going back to and having a quick go and see what you think. I mean, I enjoyed it. What more can I say? And with that, folks, it's the end of the podcast. As always, a thanks for listening. A big thank you to all my Patreon supporters, especially those who have been getting involved on the Facebook page and Twitter to some degree. It's quite active on there. That's at AMIGArama Pod. And the Twitter page, the Facebook page is just search AMIGArama on Facebook. Nice and easy. As always, you know, there'll be lots and lots of updates of things on the AMIGArama website. I'll say it's been up for a bit now, but I'm still chuffed a bit. So that's my first proper, fully designed website by me. So go and have a look at it, please. Until next time, guys.